Hello, and welcome to Our World Today, a progressive political show envisioning a better tomorrow. I'm Karen Schroffnagel, your host, and tonight our show is Behind the War on Terror with special guest Marilyn Vogt-Downey, in from New York to enlighten us on this tremendously confusing topic. And I was thinking that maybe the best way to start is, you know, people have so much information. What that they know is true and what that they think they know is actually a lie. So can you start with some of the big truths and lies on this topic?
All right, I'll start with some of the things that we know are true.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Okay. We know the war on terror started after the 9/11 events in New York City. We know that the United States used that as an opportunity to attack Afghanistan in October of 2001. They were going after bin Laden, and they said bin Laden was responsible for the attacks, and the Taliban government said the government of Afghanistan was under the control of the Taliban at that time. And they said, we'll turn him over, but we'd like to see your proof. And Washington never provided any proof and went ahead and attacked anyway. So that was the beginning of what was called the war on terror that we're still involved in. And it looks like it's going to last for quite a while. The Pentagon officials, when they meet with congressional committees, when asked when this war will be over, they say, well, it'll be at least a few decades into the foreseeable future. So this is a global problem that really lands in our laps here in the United States, because it's our government that's carrying this out, and we want to know is what's really going on, right?
Right.
So that's the beginning.
Yeah.
That's part of the truth. The other part of the truth is that we spent $1 trillion, over $1 trillion. I think it's more than $1 trillion, but that's a commonly accepted figure. And the jihadi, the armies of that we call terrorists, the jihadi groups, are flourishing. And the Taliban was defeated, clearly defeated, and surrendered or fled. What was left of them in December of 2001, within months, October, November, December, within 3 months, they fled. And the United States has put other governments in power since then, and the Taliban is back. It's 2016, and the Taliban is back. It's back so bad that the president of Afghanistan just last week said he was very afraid that Afghanistan might not survive this year. So the problems are incredibly devastating to the people of Afghanistan.
Yes.
And that's an understatement, of course. Yeah. But
what are some of the things that we're being lied to about, or things that people believe that are not true?
Well, that's the essence of what I've been studying, and it's in this pamphlet and in an article I wrote and in studies I'm doing. The fact is, when you look at the evidence of what's really going on, and of course there's a lot going on. We have had, as part of the war on terror, we've had the events in Libya where Gaddafi was overthrown, with the United States heavily involved in that. We have, of course, poor Syria that's being ruined by jihadi groups who are inside, and many other forces who are fighting there.
And of course, right after Afghanistan, we went into Iraq.
Iraq, which was, Iraq is in such bad shape that the Iraqis are wondering what the United States is going to think of next to destroy their country. And I think I have a terrible feeling of what it'll be. Maybe we can talk about that, a little down the line.
Okay. We'll tease the audience with
yes,
that.
Yes. There's some really terrible things in store, I fear, But when you look at Iraq as well, most Americans, that's not, I hate when people say that, most people in the United States of America are led to believe that the Iraqi part of Iraq's problem is that they fight among themselves. And the death squads kill one another, and of course it's torn the country apart. The fact of the matter is that the United States government caused these problems by its policies it instituted after it invaded in 2003, and has continued doing.
The de-Baathification of the government.
They started, but in reality, we need to go back to for Iraq. That's a long story too.
Right.
What happened there?
Should we go back to Afghanistan, or should we stay on Iraq?
Well, in Iraq, yeah.
There's so much.
Let me think. Yes. Well, let's go on with the basic.
The whole outline.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
So, more lies.
More lies, and so what I basically learned from my studies, my investigation, is that the United States government is the jihadi armies that U.S. government accuses of being terrorists and is at war against are being created by U.S. allies who are actually totally beholden to the United States government for their very existence.
Okay.
And they are the ones that these would be the Gulf states of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and then Pakistan are really where the funding and the organization of these jihadi armies actually begins.
Okay. So should we go back to that beginning?
Well,
or more into it?
Let's take the case of Libya.
Okay.
Libya, as many people might know, there was some events there in the early 2011, and immediately, very soon after, the United States declared it had to be part of a coalition to go in and defend the people, and they went in and bombed and ultimately murdered the leader there, Muammar Gaddafi. And the place since then degenerated into warring jihadi armed groups, and there's no Libya left.
Right.
And what I learned from my research, following materials that was research done by the Brookings Institute, actually, which is very much of an establishment foundation.
Right, not a radical think
Not
tank
the radicals, no. A woman named Elizabeth Dickinson did some serious research, and she found out that Qatar, a tiny emirate on the Arabian Peninsula, the government of Qatar actually started the violent armies in Libya, like it started violent armies in Syria, and like she says it does throughout Africa, Somalia, Sudan, and other places in the region.
So you're calling these armies, but these are small insurgent groups that fight each other.
Right, they are. And what happens is another source of funding is Kuwait. Kuwait is an artificially created entity on the tip of Iraq, on the Persian Gulf. Has a population of 4 million, most of whom are not citizens. And they are a U.S., they are really they call it the unsinkable aircraft carrier,
right.
United States unsinkable aircraft carrier. And they were the source, they were the first country that Dickinson in her research focused on, because she had traveled and studied and to find out how these armies began. And in Kuwait, because Kuwait had allegedly had, I mean, I'm sure it did, but I don't think it's an accident, had very liberal laws on shipping money around.
Okay.
So after there appeared to be some sort of an uprising in Syria against the government of Bashar al-Assad in the spring of 2020.
This is the Arab Spring, 2011.
2011, yeah.
Where there was a lot of protest activity all around
right.
the Middle East.
Right.
So.
And immediately in Kuwait, donors started building private armies. And they were all Salafist Wahhabi Muslims, which is the religion of Saudi Arabia, official religion of Saudi Arabia and of the Gulf Emirates.
Okay.
And this is the religion of ISIS, it's the religion of Al-Qaeda, it's the religion of almost all the fundamentalist groups that are warring and tearing Syria apart and tearing many other countries apart.
It was Osama bin Laden's religion as well.
He came from he came from Saudi Arabia, that's right. And so these groups are based on religious, a fundamentalist religious ideology, but it's not just that. That has very good advantages for people in power, because it's very good for divide and rule.
Right.
But the fact was that they armed them, and they didn't just arm them, they armed thousands of groups. And they armed them in order to keep their arms, keep getting money. They had to show they were they were going out and killing lots of people. And that encouraged them to fight one another. And they learned how to use or got into the habit of relying on social media to show, look what we've done, this is so terrible. And they fought among themselves. And in the meantime, if you look at Syria, if you look at the pictures of the people fleeing Syria, you'll see so many young men. And that is such an obvious indicator that the men, there's no force for them to join. That people don't flee their country if they can defend it.
Right.
And Lord knows there's enough weapons floating around, but there's just no hope. There's no hope of defending their homes and their cities and their families against these jihadi armies. And so the United States, so these Emirates, Qatar and Kuwait, and of course Saudi Arabia, contributed arms and money and organized in recruitment and helped recruit to these jihadi armies.
I want to, but this is not going into one organized opposition group. This is going into, so that it's not a group that's together against Assad. It's smaller groups that are fighting each other.
Yes.
And is it the government of these emirates, or is it people that live in these emirates? Where is the money, and how much money are we talking about? I've asked a ton of questions there, but pick and choose.
Yeah, those are good questions. It sort of brings me to the the crux of the issue is, if you look at this evidence and you say, well, the amount is billions. The Saudi government, the New York Times had an article on it just in late January, documenting that the Saudi government has contributed billions to this war, these fighting armies, these jihadi armies. And we know from Dickinson's study that the Emirates contributed tens of millions, hundreds of millions. It's hard to calculate, but it was an endless flow of money.
But it's not going into one organized, coherent opposition.
It certainly is not, no.
So,
and that's when you start to ask yourself, now you say, now hold on, what are these people doing this for? Why are they doing it? And then you start asking yourself, but these people, these countries are not, then you start looking at them and wondering, why would they and how could they? And especially you start wondering when you know the United States government says it's on a war on terror. And if a young man has any kind of affiliation with an alleged Muslim group, he'll get arrested and go to jail for a long time.
We have that happening here in our community.
Yes,
right
and here these governments are actually starting the war. There's evidence they started these wars, and they're keeping them going, and they're terrorist organizations. And so that's when you have to start questioning. When I started questioning, because I already was very suspicious of them in Iraq. And I realized and found out from studies that they were behind the jihadi armies that were tearing Iraq apart, starting with the, like you said, the de-Baathification.
And they tried to tell us that Al-Qaeda was in Iraq so that they could justify going in, even though it wasn't.
Well,
but now it's the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. That's what ISIS stands for.
That's right. And the fact is that when you look at what is being created by these actions, then you can see a pattern. And the pattern is that we're creating chaos. Where, like you said, the rise of these armies, these militarized, fundamentalist, religious nutcase armies, is these armies are going after, are making it impossible for the indigenous population to form a coherent political or party base that goes across religious lines, class-based organizations, all the nationalists are wiped out. And the society and the culture is wiped out.
The first thing they do is they kill all the intellectuals when they go into.
They kill all the intellectuals, yes, and that was what we have learned about Afghanistan and Iraq, and it's a pattern. It's a pattern.
Who benefits from this chaos? Because certainly the people on the ground, chaos is the hardest thing to live in.
The people on the ground are the victims, because the United States government, the Pentagon, is behind this, and that's what is obvious, which I can explain to you.
Yes.
But the U.S. government is behind it. It's been doing this since Afghanistan. Before Afghanistan, Afghanistan was the test case, and the point of what the United States is doing is redrawing the map. After World War I, the British and the French drew up these countries, created Lebanon, Syria, Iraq.
Kuwait.
Oh,
that was in '69 they created Kuwait.
Yeah, well, yeah, but they set the Emirates in '22. It's in this book. There's a great deal on that. It's a very good book. But there are lots of books on this. It's common knowledge. The imperialists divided the area that had been under the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
And they gave, they had these tribal leaders who would work with them against the Ottoman Empire. And their reward was they got little countries.
Right.
And then they got to rule them with their family. And they're all religious states. They're all undemocratic autocracies, and there are no civil rights. You can't protest there. It's just not done. And these are not, and if you examine them more in detail, you see that all of them are basically military bases for the United States, for the Pentagon. And so the Pentagon wants to redraw the map. U.S. imperialism wants to redraw the map of the Middle East and other places too. It's not only the Middle East, but right now I call Middle East is a kind of an imperialist-based term. I fell into it, but everyone knows what I'm talking about.
Right.
It's the Middle East if you're over here, but if you're over there, it's the Middle West. So, But anyway, the Eastern Mediterranean region, they want to redraw the map there or have no countries at all, because they want open exploitation. They want the ability to do whatever they want and take whatever they want, and they don't want any kind of a nationalist government like that. Even though it's not a problem for imperialism. I mean, Bashar al-Assad and Muammar Gaddafi both collaborated with the Pentagon in the rendition when they would capture people and take them somewhere to be tortured. They both collaborated, but it wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
They want nobody around who can challenge them. It's an astounding thing to think about. You know, it can keep you awake at night if you start thinking about it, because this plan has already ruined Iraq, Syria, of course, Afghanistan, Somalia, and other places that are being destroyed in Africa as we speak, or have already been destroyed. And as far as Syria goes, the armed groups there have been funded by the Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Now, Afghanistan is another issue.
Okay. In Afghanistan, it actually goes back to the 70s.
It goes back even further than the 70s, because this little book here is a good description of what happened there. He's just a scholar writing a description of the history. But during the Cold War in the 50s, one of the strategies the imperialism cooked up to try to undermine the Soviet Union was to go into the universities with things like the Asian Society, with other NGOs, to try to build a counterpole to secular communism in the universities. So they thought religion would be, the Muslim religion would be a good weapon against the secularism. And so they thought they could use that to go into the Central Asian republics and undermine the Soviet Union by igniting jihadi battles there like they did in Afghanistan. But the problem was the Stalinist bureaucracy in the Central Asian republics have been rather effective in incorporating the Muslim hierarchy into the apparatus, so that they had an interest. There wasn't the kind of possibilities. They didn't succeed. They couldn't get a good division going. They couldn't recruit like they wanted to, but they did it very effectively in Afghanistan.
So just to step back, because no one knows geography, the Central Asian republics are the stands and the
stands: Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and what's the last one? Tajik, Kyrgyz, Uzbek, Kazakh, and Turkmenistan. Okay. So those are the 5 Central Asian republics, and they're all bordering on the northern part of Afghanistan. The northern border goes right in. And so they thought they had a pretty good door there, but that didn't work. But they continued their work there. They continued building jihadi. What they did is they through Saudi Arabia, they would set up madrasas, and they would recruit in Pakistan they use them to recruit jihadi fighters. That's a whole process I could talk about.
Were the madrasas Wahhabist? What's the religion?
Madrasas are Muslim religious schools, and there's nothing wrong with a madrasa per se. It's what is being done with them that's wrong. But in Afghanistan, they had, what the United States did in Afghanistan was building on these Muslim fundamentalism. When the king was overthrown in 1978 by a coalition of Communist Party members and other nationalists and intellectuals, among others. They set up a remarkable secular state there for a while, 79 and 80. That's about how long they had. They had a lot of problems there too, don't get me wrong. It wasn't, there was some ugly things happen. But the really ugly thing that happened was in the countryside, the government wanted to give more rights to women, and they wanted to end some of the debt peonage, which meant that it wasn't that they had huge landlords, but they had landlords and tribal leaders who had loaned money to the very poor, and the people could never get out of debt. And it was simple things like that. But these are, so the CIA and the ISI began to organize resistance in the countryside to the policies of the government.
And the ISI is the agency from Pakistan.
The Inner Services Intelligence Agency of the Pakistan government. It's their equivalent of the CIA.
Okay.
And they began to recruit, and they sent it, they had people who became warlords who helped instigate violence in the villages against the government representatives who would come there trying to make communications to set up policies. And they had terrible, terrible attacks. And so that, of course, they finally asked for the Soviet Union to come in, and the Soviet Union finally did. I think it was the third time they did invade. And then the United States came in with, that's when they came in with their jihadi. Then they set up their jihadi recruitment network around the world and recruited the fighters to come and fight the Soviets. And the commanders were often the warlords, future warlords, and they fought the Soviets. And that's when Osama bin Laden came from Saudi Arabia, and he came with his computers and set up a database of the foreign fighters who would come. And that is what Al-Qaeda means, is the database of that jihadi recruitment effort.
So that's what Al-Qaeda is just a big database of fighters.
Yeah, you wouldn't call your organization database.
Yeah, no.
I mean, you don't, and you just wouldn't, no. And they some of the commentators try to turn it into, well, no, it means the base, like these are the base fighters, but they're just playing with words. It was the database. And so after the Soviet Union was withdrew in 1986. That left terrible problems in Afghanistan. And at that time then, the warlords who the United States had backed began fighting one another, and till the country was being torn apart. And so then some of the people started to resist the warlords. Mullah Omar was one. And they did start to get rid of the warlords, but then at the same time, the United States had been training jihadi armies in the religious schools, and that's the Taliban, because Talib being student in Pashtun, which is so the Taliban is just students, it's the plural. So the Talib came in huge numbers, well supplied, to support the fight to get rid of the warlords. And they, from 1994 on, the war was raging in Afghanistan. And they finally defeated the warlords, or they retreated. And the Taliban established a government, a religious government, as we all know, where women had no rights at all, couldn't be out, couldn't be with men at all, couldn't even go to doctors, all that kind of stuff. So it was a religious fundamentalist state of the kind that ISIS wants to set up now, that the United States is bombing. But we created it. The United States government created it, along with the Pakistani government and Saudi Arabia. And of course other of the regimes from the Gulf contributed to that too. But it was basically Saudi Arabia United States and Pakistan governments.
And is that, you mentioned that's the model. I mean, it's hard to wrap your brain around that chaos would be the goal, because
Yes,
they
I know.
talk about stability. All we want is stability, you know?
Yeah. The stability of the graveyard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
It's true that capitalism functions better in stability, when there's stability, but unfortunately, that's evidently not enough for them, because Syria had to go, Saddam Hussein had to go, Gaddafi had to go, and they're going after other places now too. And it's the new model, and it's a devastating thought that the U.S. government, U.S. imperialism, the investors, have consciously crafted a policy that, and this has been going on, this is not new. This has been going on since the 50s, what they wanted to do, but I think it's being polished up, because after we see what's happened in Syria and Libya, I don't know how anybody who's not insane would possibly think it's a good idea, but it continues to go on, and it's starting into Africa now. And this is a new book here about a little bit about it, Tomorrow's Battlefields, by Nick Turse, who does he's on the web, Tom Dispatch, a journalist, and he's uncovered some amazing things about the United States now has. It denies, he had to go up against them. They would not turn over any information. They would not let him know what was going on, and he found that they have in Africa now 49 of the 54 countries in Africa, they have bases in 49. And now we see, coincidentally, the outbreak of these terrible, terrible, bloody so-called armies in Nigeria and Mali. Now, Mali might be a little different, but Mali had Tuaregs. The Tuaregs have a history of fighting. They came out of Libya and went down there. After Libya fell into chaos, they fled back to their Mali, and they began to try to set up an independent. They were Tuaregs. That was a group, you know, an ethnic group, and they wanted some autonomy. And on top of that came a jihadi group, and has just torn Mali apart. And in Nigeria, of course, we know about the Boko Haram. That everybody knows them for having kidnapped those students, 200 girls from school. But
Al-Shabaab in
Somalia. Somalia was also one of the test cases for this policy, and because in Somalia, the Shabaab actually had established a pretty stable government in Mogadishu, and that's when the United States got, from its bases in Kenya and Ethiopia, got the African Union to invade, to destroy that stable government. And what is the purpose? The purpose is to preempt any nationalist movement that could have a social base where people would take over their own resources for themselves and have any base,
it's all about destroying
control.
Sovereignty.
It's all about destroying sovereignty, and I'm trying to. I think we could also cope with. We could also put it into more of a sort of Marxist theoretical context. I think that we learned from the history of the Russian Revolution, and before then, Marxist thinkers like Trotsky and others were explaining the theory of combined and uneven development and the theory of permanent revolution, and the concept that in these colonial countries there can't be socialism, that there can't even be really bourgeois regimes, capitalist regimes, because the democratic regimes, because the capitalists are too weak to really have a genuine parliamentary bourgeois democracy. So they have to rely on imperialism for their base, for their support, and the imperialists want to take resources. And so when they collaborate with the imperialists, that means allowing the imperialists to come in and rob the country blind, which is what they do. And so I think that behind the imperialist policy may be an effort to preempt the permanent revolution, because they realized that the working class could get strong enough to take power if they united and all of us got our act together. But this makes it absolutely impossible for that to come to be. It's hard to imagine what will happen to Afghanistan if it doesn't survive 2016. It's degenerating into drug wars, drug lords, and Taliban is getting a big start again, and it's ugly. And considering the number of refugees that have already been created there, and the destruction, massive destruction of the agricultural base that they had there by the United States doing such things as setting up, for fear of having mines in the orchards, they would set up chain bombs that would blow up an entire orchard, an entire grape arborist, turn everything into desert. And people, of course, had to flee, because then when they would come in, this was in Helmand province, they needed a safe road, so they made a huge road that went right through farms and villages, and so they would not be attacked by Taliban. And the people had to flee. They had to go to refugee camps far away, and they can't come back. There's nothing to come back to.
This is awful.
It's just terrible.
And then Ted Cruz says this thing about seeing if we can make sand
glow. Well, isn't it discouraging that after Ted Cruz says he'd like to carpet bomb Syria to get rid of ISIS, and of course ISIS was created by the same forces, by the same Pakistan, ISI, Pakistan government, and the Arab Emirates. When he says he would like to see if the sand could glow, and he can win the Iowa, it's discouraging. But it shows that the media is so powerful. But we have to counter that, and that's what you're trying to do with your program, so we can get out the story. It's a big story.
It's a little trickle against a flood. But you, in this terrific pamphlet that people who are local can get, this is What is the War on Terror and How to Fight It, that Mayday Books has printed from your article that I believe appears on Truth Out. Truth Out, and we'll put up that website so people can read this. But one of the things you go through is this lack of indigenous population in any of these Gulf states. You go through each one and you say the population is 1.4 million, only 600,000 of them are citizens.
Yes,
and I'm wondering if we could talk about that, because that is, people in this country, we don't have much labor power. The unions, of course, are backing off, and so we have a fight here. But in these Gulf countries, there's nothing. There's not even an indigenous working population to even think about creating a counter force to this. So can you share some of that information?
Yeah, because I started thinking about, well, maybe the workers in Kuwait would, or the United Arab, one of them might be a possible source of revolutionary organizing. And then when you start looking at these populations, you see I'd say there's no indigenous working class. I'm not going to say that the people don't work, but they go to jobs that are government jobs, and they're not really producing.
Dependent on the.
They're sinecures and so on. But most of the work is done by foreign indentured servants who come from impoverished countries of Bangladesh and India and just anywhere in the Asian region and Africa. They come from all over. They're indentured servants. They have no rights at all. They work in the households. They build all these high buildings that all tourists go and say, "Oh, I was in Bahrain. What a beautiful place!" It's not beautiful. It's really garish and disgusting. And the data on it, when you look at the data on it, then you can see why it's why we have a problem here. Like Saudi Arabia, the population, I believe, is about 28 million, and only about 20. That's the one with the highest percentage of citizens. 20 million are citizens. The UAE, United Arab Emirates, is the second largest, 9 million, and about a sixth of that are citizens.
Right.
In Kuwait, it's 4.1 million, and about a third of them are citizens. And then you get down to Qatar, 1.8 million, with 1/6 of them citizens. I mean, if you even look at, I mean, Brooklyn is 4 million people or 5 million, and this is about half the size of Brooklyn, and then only a sixth of those are citizens. That is Qatar, that started the war in Syria, the government of which started the military conflict in Libya. This little clique of flunkies of Washington doing this devastating in Bahrain, which is only 1.2 million, and 1/2 of them are not citizens. So it's about 600,000 people. So there, and that is, Bahrain is an air base, a U.S. air base. It's basically what it is. And
so we cannot really look to these countries to have what indigenous resistance was available in Afghanistan and Syria. This is in Iraq. This is what gets wiped out immediately when the armies come in. This is who they target first. Any sort of indigenous resistance. So,
right. Oh yes. Yeah.
So it's just.
I would even venture to say they might. I mean, one could postulate, because these uprisings were not. Also are very suspicious. One in Libya and the one in Syria. And there is a great book on that too, which is by Linda Herrera, who teaches at the University of Illinois, Revolution in the Age of Social Media. It's about the Egyptian popular uprising, and I wrote a review, a commentary on that too, because what it is it shows how the Pentagon, the State Department, the USAID, what's the one? The
Endowment for Democracy.
Endowment for Democracy. They all worked together to set up the conference at Columbia University, and I believe it was 2008, or pulling in young people from around the world, working with Google, and social media, Facebook, to get a thing going. They got promoted nonviolence as a way to overthrow a corrupt regime. So we're going to help you. We're going to help you do that. And we're going to give you a how-to book, and you go home and you just start a little uprising there. And so what they do then is the people start the uprising, and the rules, if you go to the how-to book, you have to get T-shirts all the same color. You have to have a flashy slogan. You have to look cool. You have to look, with it. Your leaders have to look really like they're, young, up-and-coming, successful. You can't be poor-looking or anything like that. And then you engage in flash crowds, and you go from place to place, and you can, upset a regime and cause trouble.
So
but the problem is you
revolution by flash mob.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, there are no politics involved.
Right.
So the people will get out. It happens. I mean, it was behind in Egypt. They did it. In Ukraine, they did it in 2012, 13. About 12 and 13. They did in Ukraine in the Orange Revolution earlier. They did in Georgia with the Rose Revolution. You see the colors? The color,
yes.
It's not an accident. These are color revolutions, and they have. You look in. They had one out in Hong Kong. Everybody was in red, and in Lebanon they had. So we have to be. It's not that it's not a good idea to use social media to do this.
Right.
But revolutionaries have to adapt this now so that we mobilize the working class.
Demands.
Yes, you have to, and that's where what it does then is that causes, and the purpose of it really is to cause an uprising against a dictatorial regime, which will obviously shoot at the demonstrators. And so, and it happened in Libya, happened in Syria, and they shoot at the demonstrations, and they flash the images on cell phones around the world, so the whole world says, "Oh my God, this awful government is shooting its people." And if they don't shoot, they have snipers who will shoot. So somebody gets killed, and then everybody's confused, and pretty soon we have chaos. And into that chaos, you shove these jihadi armies, and they tear the place apart. So I mean, it's really clever.
It is.
And they're way ahead of us.
Yeah.
Because even though our working class produces all the weapons that causes this to happen, and we have every possibility of following up on this, books about it, and read about most people are not aware of just exactly what's going on. And so we need to learn what's going on and then act on it. And I had put forth some rather detailed ideas about what needed to be done. So
should we talk briefly about what needs to be done? I also want to have a little time for Ukraine.
Okay, well, yes, but my conception of what needs to be done is we need to organize toward changing the entire system. We have to have a plan. We can't just go into this and say, well, let's have a demonstration, which is a good thing, and there need to be demonstrations to stop the war on terror, to stop funding terrorism, to stop funding the Gulf states, to stop funding the Pakistan army, and it's stop funding Taliban and all those things, you know. And I think that demonstrations like that could be a beginning to help people understand, hey, what are you talking about? If we effectively organize them so that we would go out into the streets with flyers that told the truth to people, so we could start to educate. But I mean, turning this around for people to understand is an enormous task. And but with the help of books such as these, it's being done. The issue is it's known, it's in the papers every day that these Gulf states and so on are behind these Taliban and all the jihadi groups. The problem is people don't connect it with the imperialism and Pentagon. They seem to leave it at, oh dear, isn't it terrible that these little countries can do so much damage, you know, as if the United States can't do whatever it wants to little countries that do damage, you know, and big ones too.
Poor, powerless U.S. government.
Poor, powerless U.S. government, that's right. And so we have to turn around. We have to not only take the data, but draw the conclusions from it. And that means the people in this country who are being fooled by the propaganda and the lies, the lies and the propaganda and the false story, the false narrative, we have to educate, but we also then, the issue is that our whole economy needs to be transformed, and right now it's a war economy, and we need to realize the extent to which during this time of economic crisis on a world scale that the war industry here in this country is flourishing, and it's one of the biggest, as was just in the Fortune magazine. Forbes magazine did the top employers in the world, and the U.S. Defense Department is now the biggest employer in the world. Now, part of the way it's done is, of course, if you examine any of the companies, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, or General Dynamics, or any of them, they are not only in the United States.
Right.
They have factories and other facilities, but we don't know what they are, all over the world. But in the United States, they engage in something that's called political engineering. And they take Lockheed Martin, which is the largest war producer in the world, for something like the F-35, which is a very troubled plane that can't fly in the rain and things like that. And so it's been something that should have been stopped years ago.
Yes.
It's cost billions of dollars, and it doesn't get stopped because Lockheed Martin has subcontracted the F-35 to 1,500 contractors, 1,200 contractors in 46 states, at least.
Yeah.
That's according to NPR sometime back.
They go into virtually every congressional district.
That's
Eugene
right.
Jarecki made this wonderful film like 10 years ago, Why We Fight, that looks at this.
What was that?
It's called Why We Fight.
But who did it?
Eugene Jarecki.
Okay.
He did well, anyway, I'm not
Yeah,
going to think
okay.
of them all, but for people who would rather watch videos on YouTube than read books, which is a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it talks about this deliberate policy, because it's certainly not economically efficient to
No.
make a piece in every congressional district of a weapon, but it keeps the Congress from defunding these absurd weapon systems.
That's
So,
right. And the people who are subcontracted to do things, they might not realize that they're building a component for a Trident missile
Right.
or something that's deadly. But then again, some of these jobs are well-paying jobs. Some of them.
the few remaining decent jobs in this
That's right.
country. So
That's right.
how do we stop that? Our working class is implicated.
Is implicated, and the fact is part of the problem is for the working class in this country to realize that when they participate in producing weapons that the capitalist government uses to destroy the workers and working classes and workers and their families and create millions of refugees who have nowhere to go and have no more a home, that's going to come back to hurt us too. That hurts us because you can't, that's just more people who are desperate who will do anything for $1, and that's mainly if we talk about how they recruit the jihadis.
Right.
That's one of the ways that that's a pool of people they can always rely on, the desperate, the destitute, the orphans, the families with no breadwinner anymore, people who are living in absolute, with absolutely nothing, with everything gone, no future. And so it's not in our interest to be part of this war, this machine of death that is our U.S. government. And so we need to find ways to reach the most people who will listen to us and to try to begin to have a network of organizations to continue what he did in that documentary and what other people have done in research. But the workers themselves have to start to investigate what their work is a part of and to link it up, because it's not only the jobs they do, but it's their paychecks that support entire communities. And we need to become conscious of our place in society and what we're doing. That this is how we can change it. And this is something that's going to take tremendous organization, but it's absolutely indispensable. I can't see any other way of stopping this because it's too big. That's why we couldn't stop it with wars, protests against the Iraq War. It's just too big.
We did protest before the start in the millions.
Absolutely, and we
it
failed.
Still happened. Yeah.
And since that time, there's hardly been any significant anti-war activity, and you can understand why. Because we went to Washington, millions of people were out. We had huge protests, went all the way from Union Square to Times Square, filling up the streets.
Yes.
And it didn't stop anything.
Right.
And so people say, well, we don't
Bush
protest.
referred to us as a focus group. Remember that? I'm not going to listen to a focus group. Yeah. Yeah.
But we can't, that's not going to work.
Right.
And so we have to, it's a bigger plan. We have to have a bigger plan. Of course, that's going to take a revolutionary party. We have to have a party that can have its place, just like Lenin said, people everywhere. And we have to promote this and help make sure it's cohesive and that it knows where it's going and it's not co-opted. because the plan is to get workers to realize their role in the system, to consciously realize they don't want that to be the case anymore, and we're going to organize a new way. Now, this is not going to mean that the ruling class is going to say, well, you know, we've had a good time now, it's your turn. I don't think that'll happen. So it's going to be an uphill battle. But no matter how uphill it is, it's not as uphill as workers in the rest of the world have it. And we have every possibility of doing this, and I think that we could do it, and we could have a workers' government that would replace capitalism, and I think we could confiscate the wealth of the war industry to make sure everyone is taken care of and that we have what we need, and we can also help the workers in other countries make the revolution and also make up for rebuild their countries on a basis of not death but life, I would say.
And I mean, they would be enormously helped just by the U.S. not fomenting, the U.S. and the different emirates fomenting all this violence. I mean, it's not just that we need to go in and help them. We need to stop harming them so much, and then maybe they can help themselves.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
I mean, the United States Saudi Arabia is, all of these countries, these Arab Emirates, survive only because the United States ruling class uses them for military bases. Now, Saudi Arabia, the United States gives so much aid to Saudi Arabia that it's the third biggest military power in the world now.
This is shocking.
It's a shocking thing.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that, the United States is so far ahead of anyone else. The United States is like 500, 600 billion. Then after that comes China, which is about a fifth of that, and then a half of that is Saudi Arabia. It's nothing compared to what the U.S. spends, but it's still the third military power in the world. And we have to stop all aid. We have to make people aware of why we have to stop all aid to these Emirates. But they are just the flunkies for the Pentagon. So even if we could stop them from using the Gulf Emirates, it's likely they'd find another way.
Yeah, of course.
But
they've tried a lot.
Yeah, it's building a class consciousness of what the ruling class, what capitalism has created by 2016 in the minds of the working class of this country. That's our major task right now. And hopefully this interview will help a little bit, and the pamphlet. So
we've managed to use all our time so quickly. I want to refer people to your excellent article, What is the War on Terror and How to Fight It? People can find it at Mayday Bookstore if you're local, in Minneapolis on the West Bank. And if you're not local, you can find it on Truth Out and some of these wonderful books. And thank you so much, Marilyn, for joining us. Well, thank you
for giving me an opportunity to speak about it, and hopefully it'll make a difference and reach an audience.
We appreciate your incredible expertise on this, all the research you've done. Thank you for joining us for Our World Today. Thank you, Dave Garland, our director, and we'll see you again soon.